have new stuff coming out well, stuff that already came out in 2024. It's not really coming out, it's already out. As Christine told, people are up and running on it. Cloud went live on this and Epicor rolled it out. Had a few hiccups in the first two patches, but seems like they're ironing out a lot of the features right now. Some of the new features in the new software is a connected process control. And this is supposed to embed digital signals from any system that pretty much has the ability to communicate electronically. So having the ability to turn around and pull in data from anything that can communicate electronically. So if you have a PLC or we have a control board on a piece of equipment, if we have a robotic material handler, this can be pulled in and connected directly. And it's still a fairly low code, no code type integration as long as there's APIs to connect the two. I love this one because it came up in our discussions this morning before the user group meeting. Is there's now AI knowledge assistance with Epicor Learning. Microsoft Azure's OpenAI ChatGPT was integrated into Epicor Learning help and support. If anybody used ChatGPT before this came out, it already existed. This wasn't really anything new, but now it's actually in the software. I don't necessarily call it AI. I call it a web browser that goes out and does the searches, gathers the data, and presents it to you. Pretty much the same as doing a Google and just clicking through the links. It's a little quicker now. But the ChatGPT you can also use whether you're using it inside the software or not. There's a new navigational tree in the Kinetic apps, and you can still go back to the old one. So while I say the old one, Kinetic's fairly new for everybody, but they did update the navigational tree inside the Kinetic app, so you not just have the items, you can also look through some more of the details regarding the transactions, as well as still having the activity tab so that you can go see, hey, this order turned into this job, turned into this shipment, turned into this invoice. That's still out there, but the navigational tree has additional nodes in it now where you can get to information without having to go to activities. The solution workbench has an intellectual property protection, IPP. So what I say is if you hire somebody to build a customization for you, you get the source code with it, not just the runtime. Otherwise, every time you apply a patch or upgrade your software, you have to go back to that vendor, that person that wrote it, and repurchase an upgrade for your code. This goes back to where Epicor was 25 years ago with Progress Software. Every time you applied a patch, you had to go back and have your customization rebuilt and recompiled. It looks like this is where they're taking the customizations behind functions and custom programs and saying it's now intellectual property. You no longer own the software, you own the license to use it. If you're going to pay someone to customize your software and build a customization, make sure you get the source for this as well, so that if that vendor disappears, you can still maintain this moving forward. There were a handful of country-specific functionality that was towards Singapore, Thailand, India, Poland, and SEPA. So if you have companies in any of these locations, make sure you get the updates for the CSF. Most of it was applying towards taxation in those countries. On top of those features, they had enhancements. Time phase inquiry, even though it had, 40 columns of data and you always had to scroll across to go find out what was going on, it now has even more information on the screen. Again, a great place to personalize. And someone had posted a question regarding personalization on Kinetic screens. Is that per user only? Yes, you can have personalizations that follow your user account. That user can also export their personalizations and share it with other users. So if I have a team leader or a department head, they can personalize the screen as they want all of their department to use it and then share that personalization out. As IT ERP admins, we can also take those personalizations and roll them up into the application studio. Creating an RMA now can be done from an order, a shipment, or an invoice. So if I have a sales order on screen, I can create an RMA directly from the order for it. Same thing from the shipment or the invoice. Christine, maybe you can help on the stock status real-time dashboard. I did not have a chance to take a look at that and see what it looked like before the meeting. But stock status, to me, I mean, it was a report, but now I think it's just a dashboard of the inventory. Yeah, I was thinking there was more to this since they added real time to it.
Not from what I can see.
It's fun when they add cool words. Hey, it's AI. MRP works with expiration dates on lots. So if anybody has lots of materials that have expiration dates, MRP will now look at these and say, you don't have enough material at the date that we need to run this job. And also MRP now generates a multi-level pegging log file. So in the past, we would get the MRP scheduling and process logs. We can now also get the multi-level pegging if you guys turn that on when you run MRP. Automation Studio now has a connector for QuickShip 2024.1.
Got a question. When is 2024 supposed to be live? It's already out, isn't it?
Yeah, 24.1 was released right before the week before Insights.
Yeah, it was in May.
On-prem. It was cloud, I think, before then.
Yeah, it was cloud in April, I want to say, and then on-prem was in May.
And we've been live since June 21st. I think they're at patch .8 or not, maybe 7 or 8 right now.
ECM user interface has a lot of changes trying to simplify and make it easier to use. ECM is finally getting updated. It's not the same DocStar software that's been out there for years. They're starting to brand it and move it a little further with Epicor ERP. FP&A now have BAQ support for them. So you can turn around and do BAQs inside your financial planner. Epicor CPQ, I read this and I still have yet to find one customer that has an Apple Vision Pro in their engineering department. But there is enhanced 3D visualizations now inside the Epicor CPQ. If anybody has an Apple Vision Pro, please put a message into the question or the comment, because I really want to see what this looks like. I just don't want to spend the $3,000 for a Vision Pro. And a lot of enhancements in the field service management area. So for field service users, this is definitely a good impact for them. The user experience changes, and a lot of these suggestions were made by the users using the ideas portal. So an awful lot of the suggestions that Epicor took and said, hey, let's make this into new software, actually came from suggestions submitted by end users. The Transfer Order Workbench can now be launched from the menu. All that do intercompany transfer orders where you always had to go up to the actions or the overflow and kick off the Transfer Order Workbench, you can now put that as a menu ID directly on the menu. Order entry can be launched when winning a quote. So instead of the system saying, hi, you want this quote, and turned it into order 12345, and then you had to open order entry manually and type in order 12345, you can now take it directly to order entry from the quote. And this next one, while I read it and investigated, it said the quote worksheet refreshes as the method of manufacturing is updated on a quote. There was a refresh worksheet on demand and a refresh automatically setting already for a quote. So I'm not sure how this really changed because the functionality was always there. If you had a method of manufacture that was super complex and had multi-levels of sub-assemblies, you could turn off the auto refresh so that it wouldn't slow down the quoting process. And then when you went back to look at your worksheet, you could say, hey, refresh everything and show me what's going on. Now they list it as the method of manufacturing changes, the worksheet automatically refreshes. This already was there. I did not know there were bugs in it. Advanced material management, fulfillment rules and actions to auto allocate and reserve. You can also set up in Kinetic rules for your fulfillment so that when you do automate fulfillment, you can say how you want it to be handled. You can also say fulfill only from the demand warehouse, not from all warehouses. This comes in handy if you have obsolete or slow-moving stock warehouses where you offer a discount or a priceless discount on those warehouses. You don't necessarily want product being fulfilled from those when fulfillment runs. Definitely look into the automated fulfillment rules that now exist. You do have to set these up for jobs, transfer orders, and sales orders, and pick a default rule for each one. And this is only visible from the Kinetic UI. You cannot see this from the classic UI, and it's required if you're going to run the automated fulfillment. Inventory, create and select serial numbers from a single integrated panel. So I know everybody that does serial number tracking is now jumping up and down for joy for this, because it was a multi-screen in the past if you did serial tracking on items. And Fred, I know you always teach aliasing with SQL, but now you can give menu items aliases, because us old timers don't call it suppliers, we call them vendors, because that's what the data table was originally created as. Now I can alias the supplier menu item under purchase management as a vendor. I don't know if that's good to allow us old goats to keep doing it that way, but you can alias your menu items. It makes it much easier to adopt when you're coming from a different software where they called it this, and now Epicor calls it this. People don't always get that terminology changed. Now you can go in and alias that. I don't know if this is a benefit or a hindrance, because when we get together as user groups or at Insights, people may not know what they're talking about if all they know is what the alias is. My vote is still out on if this is good, but I like it for vendor and supplier names.
A note from Graham, field service enhancements only appear to be the add-on product and not built into the field service module. And from Mickey, the stock status dashboard can't be seen, only the report. Are they the same thing?
It is a dashboard. So the real-time stock status is a dashboard. The report you can still print to paper. Inside Application Studio, I can now add grow widgets. I have a much better way of converting old classic applications, but again, still if it was custom code behind it, that generally has to be converted to a function. So the Application Studio would still handle the user experience framework of the screen. The custom code that you had behind the screen would still have to be moved over to a function and then called from the UI. Some new things, layer merging. So if I have a layer that I've been building and, hey, I like this one, now I'm going to go experiment and build a new layer and a new customization and add things to it. I can actually merge the two together and save only the modifications or the differences between the two. Orphan components on the user interface, the layer merging with also the orphan. So if you design something and then accidentally hit it or removed it, those become orphans. Those can also be merged. And there's now also in Application Studio a version compare and a rollback. If you build that new Application Studio that just doesn't work for you, you can always revert and go backward. Automation Studio now has the ability to close the old quotes, orders, customer notification of the ready to ship. I can't say those were super good because the expiring of old quotes is a process that was already on the menu. I don't know of people that turn around and expire old orders. I think you were supposed to close those yourself manually if they didn't ship. But I guess Automation Studio can now close those old orders. You can also use Automation Studio for sales order requiring approval for processing. It's like anything that's below a 10% margin, that order has to be approved before we accept it. You can put an approval process now through that Automation Studio to make sure that orders are being processed correctly. And the Solution Workbench now finally works in the Kinetic browser. I'm going to say, Christine, question for you on the spot. Are you doing your BAQs in Kinetic, or you still do those in Classic?
The ones we've done, we've gone back to Classic and done. Same with print routings, for instance. We're also making sure that they have to go in Classic to complete.
Yeah, I find it difficult to use the Kinetic interface for a handful of the areas where I would have called it more the ICE framework tools. And Solution Workbench was one of those. In my book, it was totally fine having the Edge agent open the classic version. Quote part shows the available on-hand inventory. So, like when you were in order entry on the order line, you could see this is what the sales order quantity was, but this is what I have on hand and available. Now I see that also on the quote part tab. The generation of unapproved purchase orders from suggestions. So I made a suggestion, but I don't want to approve it necessarily because I'm not sure I have everything correct on that PO. Just because it's within my spending authority level, if I turn around and process the PO suggestion, it went through and got approved. You can now turn around and unapprove purchase orders that are generated from suggestions when the generation runs. Supplier price lists retrieve using specific values and combinations of values. So I can now put price lists in a little more complex than just basic information. And if anybody has, I know the reversing of a cash receipt, the reversing of transactions, this now applies to credit memos that were applied. So if you applied a credit memo in error, you can now reverse that as well. There is a transfer balances report. Now at year end, a lot of people complained about this at year end last year, that when you run the transfer balances, you don't know what it's going to do. You just trust that the process runs and there was no audit. Now you can get an audit report at year end of what your transfer balance is proposing to do. And I see here a customization we've always done at CodaBears is now part of base product. You can clock out and end activities of MES users. So if we have that user that decided to go home and forgot to clock out, the supervisor can now clock them out and report their end activity stuff. That doesn't need to be done through a customization anymore. That's base product. On the job operations, when you define an operation, you can now also specify what labor entry method that operation is for. So is it going to be time? Is it going to be time and quantity? Is it backflush? Anytime you add that operation to a method, it's going to come in with that default labor already set. Production yield recalculation can be ran from job entry now with filters, and comparing revisions from within the engineering workbench was added. Before you had to go back to, I believe, the engineering general operations menu to run the compare revision. That can now be done from right inside of the engineering workbench. If you do credit card sales on your sales order, in the past, you could change the order, but that didn't tell you that the credit card needed to be reprocessed or was getting changed. Now the system turns around and gives you a warning that the credit card authorization you ran now may be incorrect, and you'll get a warning when you're changing the order values. Order promise date, a lot of people had this as a customized field on their order release tab so they knew what the need by date was, the ship by date, but what is the promise date? And these are not necessarily, hey, auto recalculate one based on the other, even though now the delivery days is calculated from customer settings. So on the customer record, you can go in and say delivery days to this customer is 3 days. Now, when I put in the need by date, it'll backward calculate what's my ship by date based on that number of days for delivery. I don't necessarily know why they put this in, because the delivery days should be specific to the ship to address for the customer. Shipping to the customer in Germany is going to be a different number of delivery days than shipping to the customer in Chicago down the street. But the delivery days is on the customer record, not on the ship to. And I would think that the ship via method would also impact that, because if you send it overnight, your delivery days is not 5. You may enter a delivery days of 5 for UPS ground, but if we choose UPS overnight, it's going to be 1 day. So they added the ability to do this by default, but I did not see if there was a way to turn that off and not calculate it. You can also set parts as sellable or non-sellable. So before, we used to have a web sellable. Was that available when we created the export for ECC or web integration? There's now also a sellable or non-sellable checkbox, meaning if it's not sellable, you can't put it on a sales order. There is a part quantity tracker now, which is also that real-time inventory quantities. Generally, you always had to go to the part tracker. look at the Sites tab or the Warehouse tab and see the on-hand inventory. Now there's a part quantity tracker, and ooh, blanket purchase orders now exist in the system. The blanket purchase order, when I took a look at it, looks more like the Kanban purchase order, where I set up a purchase order and a release or a line, and then I go over into part maintenance and I add that PO and line to the part record where I set the min-max inventories. When I run suggestions, it's going to say, hey, I need a suggestion for 50 of this part. If it's set up as a blanket, it's auto ordering it. This was similar to if it had a Kanban and we had the min-max and the inventory settings set at the warehouse or the bin, it automatically added the release to the PO. Same thing, but I did not see that this required any special license. This looks like it's on the base part record, not part of like Kanban, I think was part of AMM. So that kind of, I know we're pushing the edge here. I'm a little over. I'm sorry, Ryan, I'm not going to get into it, but yes, you had mentioned Epicor removed some functionality like landing grids for part screens. If you want to bring this back, I'll go ahead and forward Ryan's comment here. He has a link to it in ideas asking for it to bring it back. There were 16 to remove it, but 124 votes to bring it back. I'm seeing, because it has 124 votes to bring it back, Ryan, you got a good chance of winning this one. There's an awful lot of things in the new software. They're doing something, but I like that they're taking user feedback and putting the changes in.
Let's shift over to going paperless on the shop floor.